Good morning, students. Welcome to this class on reading poetry. In today's class, we'll begin with the first poem, Elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray. And in this class, we'll discuss the poet, the genre elegy before going into the poem. Elegy written in a country churchyard. Thomas Gray is a very famous poet in the 18th century. We can place him towards the end of the 18th century. He was reflective and melancholic in nature, and that is reflected in his poetry as well. He was a literary recluse who denied poet laureateship, and he was self-critical and didn't write much, even though he was popular during his lifetime. He wrote only 13 poems, around 13 poems. He wrote two famous Pindaric odes and several other odes and lyrical poems, and this famous elegy written in a country churchyard. And these works secured him a lasting place in the history of English poetry. Before going into the poem and the genre elegy, we should place this author. I hope you are now familiar with the different periods in the history of English literature and history of English poetry as well. So where can we place this writer, Thomas Gray? Can you give a few suggestions? Where can we place him? In which era does he belong to? When we analyze the history of English poetry, we find, that the medieval romanticism found its full expression in the Elizabethan poetry of Sidney Spenser and Shakespeare. And England became the nest of singing birds. But nevertheless, this romantic fervor declined with the metaphysical poets. And when we come to this neoclassical age, the poetry became intellectual. It was full of rules, under the bondage of rules and conventions. That was in the 18th century. And after that, we have again a romantic revival with the poets like Wordsworth, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Shelley. And again that romanticism of the Elizabethan era and the medieval romanticism was revived. And so that is the 19th century. So between this neoclassical age and this romantic era, we have a transitional period. Now the latter half of the 18th century, and we can place this writer, Thomas Gray, during that period, during the period of transition from neoclassical poetry to the romantic poetry. The neoclassical poetry, which focused on rules, conventions, intellect and reason, to the romantic poetry of which are focused on the exploration of the self, to the subjective poetry of romanticism. So we can place this Thomas Gray, this writer, during this period of transition. So he's a transitional poet who exhibits the traits of both the eras, the neoclassical, certain traits of the neoclassical era as well as certain traits of the romantic era. And he's also called as a pre-romantic. He's a transitional poet. He's a pre-romantic, paving way for the romantic poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Shelley and Keats and so on, with the emphasis on the self, on emotion, on imagination. So, when we look into the poems of Thomas Gray, we find that he adhered to the neoclassical rules in his use of diction. But in the form, he rejected the heroic couplets, which was the favorite form of the neoclassical writers. And he used irregular metrical stanzas and wrote lyrical poems, unlike the neoclassical writers who wrote heroic couplets, like Dryden, the writers like Dryden who wrote heroic couplets. So that is one thing that you need to note, how the shift in the writing that we find in Thomas Gray. He belongs to this later half of the 18th century, which is also called as the age of sensibility. When the writers like Swift and Pope, they started to teach the readers how to feel, rather than the neoclassical writer, rather than how to think. That is what the neoclassical writers did. They wanted the people to think. But the romantic writers, they wanted the people to feel, the writers of this age of sensibility. And that is, you can say that these writers of sensibility, they are the precursors of romantic era, with its focus on the self. So these writers made the people to feel, to evoke a response, emotional response from the readers. And that is what we find in the poetry of Thomas Gray as well. So we can say that he belongs to this age of sensibility. He is a transitional poet. He is a pre-romantic. And also one more thing that we can note in his poems is a note of distress, or the morose elements that we find in his poems, like focus on death, immortality, disease and distress, this melancholy, and all these traits make him a graveyard poet or a churchyard poet. That is a group of poets like Oliver Goldsmith, William Cowper, these writers, they follow this tradition of graveyard school of poets, who focus on loss, death, and disease and distress. So when we read these poems like Elegy, written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray, we find that this Thomas Gray is, he can be placed among this graveyard school of poets as well. They are also called as churchyard school of poets, and that is actually a precursor to the Gothic era that we find during the Romantic period. You can say that the poems like Elegy, written in a country churchyard, and other writings by Goldsmith and William Cowper, these are the poetry of the graveyard school of poets. It's actually a precursor to the Romantic, the Gothic era that is about to come later on. So when we analyze the poetry of Thomas Gray, we find that find these three traits. He's a transitional poet. He's a poet belonging to this age of sensibility. Making the people think, not think, to feel. And he's a churchyard school of poet. He's a poet belonging to this tradition of graveyard school of poetry. He's a pre-romantic, a transitional poet. So, we can find all these traits in his poems. And especially in the poem Elegy, written in a country churchyard, again we have this, he didn't use heroic couplets. He used metrical stanzas. The poem is lyrical. And in the use of diction, he adheres to the neoclassical conventions, but the treatment is entirely different. It's subjective, it's self-reflexive. You can say that, it's melancholic and reflective in nature, and he gives importance to emotion as well as imagination, which is a key of, the key features in the Romantic poetry. So this is something that we need to understand about Thomas Gray as a writer. He is a writer. He is a transitional poet, writer who exhibited all these traits. And coming to this particular poem that we are about to learn, Elegy, written in a country churchyard. Again, we find all these features. He talks about death. He talks about the transient nature of human life. It's actually an elegy. And what is an elegy? We have studied different genres of poetry, right? Lyric, elegy, dramatic monologue, epic, ballads, and so on. So elegy is one of the genres which it's a poem of lament. For let's see, how it originated. It has its origin from the Greek word elegias, which means a song of lament. And initially it was a poem written in elegiac meter, elegiac couplets. And the themes included war, love, loss of love, death, not only death, but it was other themes were also dealt, but it was written in elegiac meter, in elegiac couplets. And those poems written in that particular meter was called an elegy. But later on, by the 16th century, in English literature, when elegy was popular in English literature, it became a poem of lament, no matter the meter. And it need not be in elegiac meter or elegiac couplets, but in whatever meter it is, if the theme is about lamenting the death of someone, it is an elegy. So that is how it transformed into the elegy that we know at this point of time. So and this elegy has got different forms like threnody, monody, dirge, pastoral elegy. The first three are almost similar, but the last one, the pastoral elegy, is somewhat different in the sense that the characters, the mourner and the beloved who is dead and gone, they are all in the guise of shepherd and shepherdesses. The setting is rural, and that is the difference. How the difference between the normal conventional elegy and the pastoral elegy. And another thing that we can notice about this elegy is, we can identify a common or generally we can divide this elegy into three broad divisions, three stages. We can identify three stages in the poem. It begins with the lamenting the death of the beloved. The poet or the speaker in the poem, the mourner, will be mourning the death. And then there is this stage of idealization, praising the beloved. And the third part, the last one, is about hope and consolation, especially the Christian elegies that we have in English literature. They end in hope and consolation, hope of seeing the beloved after the death, after when they are reunited in heaven later on. So these three stages are seen in this elegy also, elegy written in a country churchyard also. We find these are certain features that we find in elegies. In English literature, we have got umpteen number of elegies. The very famous elegies are, Adonais, which lamented the death of Keats by Shelley. Then we have In Memory of W.B. Yeats by Auden. We have In Memoriam. We have Thyrsis. Lycidas, it's a pastoral elegy by John Milton. In all these elegies, we find different perspectives on death, on loss, on all those things. And the elegy that we are going to learn today is elegy written in a country churchyard. It's actually, though the poem was inspired by the death of one person, the best friend of Thomas Gray, Richard West. Though it was inspired by the death of this Richard West, he doesn't mourn the death of Richard West alone in this poem. We find in between where he referred to this his friend's death, but he actually mourns death itself. He mourns death. He mourns about the lost opportunities, about the transient human nature, the mortality, the mortal life, and so on. He talks about village, death of the villages, which went unnoticed, the death which was not commemorated, the death which was not celebrated, as in many other famous deaths, you can say, where you have urns and funeral services, elaborate funeral services and magnificent tombstones. So he talks about the death and the tombstones of humble villages and how their life went unnoticed. So this is the main theme that runs throughout. And he begins the poem with actually the setting. When we look into the setting itself, we find that we can say that he's a poet who belongs to this tradition of graveyard school of poets or the churchyard school of poets, because he actually he describes a churchyard, you can say a graveyard, or to be specific, and the setting is actually evening. He begins the poem by saying that he hears the bell. He says the curfew tolls the knell of parting day. So that is how the poem begins, and the first line itself sets the mood and tone of the poem, and it's a metaphor for death. He says, the sound of the bell says the day is about to end. So, he says, the poet says, he hears this bell, and it's metaphorical that it's a bell that gives him a warning that the life is going to end, and that metaphor itself sets the theme of the poem. So, I hope you have your textbooks with you, and I want you to turn to this poem, Elegy written in a country churchyard, and we'll start reading and analyzing the poem. And as we read through the poem, and I want you to look into the poetic devices used by the poets and the theme that runs throughout. And I hope you remember the poetic devices that we have learned in the last class. So, that will help you in reading the poem. So, please turn to the poem, Elegy written in a country churchyard. Elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly over the lea. The ploughman homeward plods its weary way, and leaves the world to darkness and to me. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds. Save where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. Save that from yonder ivy-mantled tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain of such as wandering near her secret bower, molest her ancient solitary reign. Beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. So this is how the poem begins. The poet says, the curfew tolls the knell of parting day. So with that, we understand the setting of the poem. It's evening, and the sound of the bell, the curfew toll, the bell is heard. During those ancient times, there was watch was not that popular, clocks were not that popular, and to make the villagers or the people know that the day is going to end, the church bell is the bell is rung, and the poet hears that sound, which is the knell of the parting day, which heralds that the day is about to end. It's actually a metaphor. This bell that rings to mark the end of the day is actually a metaphor for the bell or the warning that is given to human beings, the humans, that to people, that the life is transient. Life is, you are all mortals, and you will die one day or the other. And the death knell is being heard. And then he moves on after After letting us know the setting, he moves on to describe the scene that he sees when he is alone there in the churchyard. He sees the herd going back to their shelter place. The flocks, the lowing herd, they are very tired, and their head is low with sleep and slumber and tiredness. They are going back to their shelter place. The lowing herd winds slowly over the meadow. They are walking back to their shed. And the plowmen, the farmers, homeward plods their weary way. So these plowmen, they also go back to their home. The plowman homeward plods his weary way. Again, we find another poetic device here. It's a transferred epithet. Who is weary here? The plowmen, the farmers, they are weary. But the use is different. Weary way. It's not the way which is weary, but actually the farmers are weary. So that is an example of transferred epithet. So the plowman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. And now the poet is alone in solitude. And it is dark. It's about to be night. So let's see the poem once again. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly over the lea. The plowman homeward plods its weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. So this sets the mood and tone of the poem. And then he moves on to describe the sounds that hear. He describes this, what he sees. And then in the next stanza, he describes the sounds. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the side, and all the air a solemn stillness holds. Say where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinglings lull the distant folds. So, the light is all, the glimmering landscape describes the beautiful sunset, and how the air holds this, it's very still and solemn. There is no sounds. It's utter silence apart from the sound of the beetles. And then the sound of the bells, which these cattle they have around their necks. The tingling sound of the bells, which is compared to lullabies sung for these cattle to sleep. So again, we find this example of transferred epithet, and drowsy tinglings lull the distant folds. So actually, it's not the bell which is drowsy, but the folds, the flock. The sheep, the cows, after the long day, they are now tired and they are drowsy. And these bells around their neck, the sound of the tingling sound of the bell is compared to the lullaby sung to these foals. So, we hear the sound, and then he moves on to describe the tower there, the lonely tower, and the owl there. Say that from yonder ivy-mantled tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain. Then again, the description is about the setting. There is this ivy-mantled ivy. The creepers are all around the tower, the solitary tower there. And there is this owl above. And it appeared to the poet as if the owl is complaining to the moon about the presence of this writer, the poet or the speaker, who has intruded into her place, place of reign. And he says, let's see what the owl complains. Say that from yonder ivy-mantled tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain of such as wandering near a secret bower. So somebody has come to the secret bower, secret hiding place of the tower, to molest her ancient solitary reign. And that is the complaint of the moon, complaint of the owl. The sound of the owl appears, the cry of the owl appears to the poet as if, the owl is complaining to the poet, complaining to the moon about the presence of the poet. And in the next stanza, again, we find the description of the tombstones the description of the graveyard. Beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaps the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. No, in that graveyard there are huge elm trees, yew trees are there, and beneath those trees, there are tombstones, just heaps. It's not an elaborate, magnificent tombstone, very humble tombstones, and in each narrow cell in that tomb lies the forefathers, the rude or the humble forefathers, unpolished, uncouth forefathers of that small village. Hamlet is a small village. Village sleep. They sleep eternally in those tombstones. And then, with this, this setting, he talks about the setting of the poem. It sets the tone and mood of the poem. And then he introduced these humble villages. First he introduces the tombstones of the humble villages, where they are eternally asleep. And then the poet moves on to say that these humble forefathers, they cannot be wakened from their sleep. They cannot be wakened from their eternal sleep. They cannot be wakened from their death. Nothing can call them back to life. And he then compares the life of the rich, of the ambitious, of the people, of the glorious people. Even those people cannot be called back to life, cannot be awakened from their eternal sleep. That is the argument that we see in the coming stanzas. He says, the breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twittering from the straw-built shed, the cock's shrill clarion or the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lowly bed. So nothing can call them or wake them from their eternal sleep. Usually if you are, when these people, when they're alive, the breezy call of the morning, make them or wake them up. The sweet fragrant morning air wakes them up. The swallow, the sound of the birds twittering from the straw-built nest, these are the sounds that the villagers used to hear when they were alive. The sound of the swallows, the sound of the cock, the shrill clarion of the cocks, the echoing horn, and all these things will not rouse them from their lowly bed now. So these things used to wake them up when they were alive, but now nothing can wake them from their eternal sleep. For them no more the blazing hearth shall burn, or busy housewife ply her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return, or climb his knees the envied kiss to share. So these are the humble joys, the life that they had when they were alive. Now the hearth will not burn for them to keep them warm. There is no need for, now their bodies are all cold, cold, which is associated with death. So now the hearth will not burn for them to make them warm. No, there is no busy housewife waiting for the return of the farmer, or the children who are waiting for their father's return for their envied kiss, to get the kiss of their fathers. And these are the humble joys that these poor farmers of that village enjoyed, but now they are no more to enjoy these things. And then the poet talks about the hard work of those people. Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield, therefore oft the stubborn glebe has broke. How jocund did they drive their team afield, how bowed the woods beneath the sturdy stroke. So they were all hard-working people. They are well built and they were healthy, and there weren't any stone which were stubborn for their axe or their tools couldn't break. And they had good harvest, they yielded good harvest, they worked hard, and they went with their team to the field, the flocks to the field, drive their team or drive their flocks to the field. and they cut woods. They were woodcutters, they were shepherds, they were farmers, and all these people were hard working people, and their hard work yielded much harvest to them. That is when they were alive. And after talking about the humble life, the joys of these people and the hard work of the people, he cautions the poet, the speaker and the poet cautions the rich, the ambitious, and says that, don't mock at these poor people who were denied opportunities because of poverty. The poet says, let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. So he addresses the ambitious people, says that do not mock at these the hard work of these poor people, their homely joys, their destiny obscure, their obscure destiny. Why their destiny was obscure? Because of poverty, because of lack of education, lack of money, lack of opportunities. Nor grandeur here with disdainful smile. Don't look at with disdain towards these people. Don't mock the short and simple lives of those poor people. Why? He gives a reason in the next stanza. Says, the boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth ever gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. So that is the reason why you shouldn't mock at the poor lives of these poor people. Because not only these poor people, but those who boast of high birth, the nobility, the people who enjoy power, the pomp of power, and all that beauty and wealth ever gained, the wealthy people, and their life, and what is their destiny? The destiny of these poor people, it was obscure. But at the same time, the destiny of the rich, the ambitious, the beautiful, the wealthy is also the same. They also awaits alike for that inevitable hour, which is death, the great leveler. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. So finally, whether you are rich or poor or healthy, wealthy or whatever, finally, grave is something, everything leads to grave. Death is a great leveler, and everybody waits for this inevitable hour, death. And that is why you shouldn't mock at the simple lives of the poor people of that village. And that is how the poet presents the first part of the poem. Says, the boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, all that beauty, all that wealth ever gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. Emphasis, and this stanza emphasize the main theme that runs throughout the poem. The transient nature of human life, how death awaits alike for everyone. So we'll move on to the next stanza in the next class. And I hope, I want everyone to read through these stanzas and analyze the theme and also the poetic devices used. The alliteration, use of alliteration, use of certain metaphors, the imagery used by the poet. Can you find a few examples of alliteration here? Solemn stillness holds, the surge sound, transferred epithet, metaphor, this auditory imagery is there. You have to find out, I want you to note down the different poetic devices, the sound of the beetle, the drowsy tinglings of the distant folds, examples of auditory imagery. We find the visual imagery of the graveyard, and I want you to do that. So I hope it is clear, and if you have any doubts, please post it in the Google Classroom or let me know, or you can post it in the comment box below. We'll continue with the poem in the next class. Have a beautiful day and have fun. Take care. Bye.